The Atlanta sun blazed down on the Nexus Tower construction site that August afternoon, casting long shadows across the sprawling 40-acre development. Concrete trucks rumbled past orange safety cones while cranes swung steel beams against the Georgia skyline. This wasn't just any construction project. At $847 million, it would be Atlanta's tallest residential tower, a symbol of the city's rapid growth and ambition. Inside the temporary engineering trailer, 4 young professionals hunched over blueprints and laptop screens. Brad Sinclair, the 28-year-old lead engineer, adjusted his Georgia Tech class ring as he pointed to foundation diagrams. His blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the construction site heat, and his crisp white shirt bore no trace of the dust that coated everything else on the site. Tyler Mitchell and Sarah Chen flanked him at the conference table, their own laptops displaying complex structural calculations. The air conditioning hummed against the oppressive summer heat, creating a bubble of corporate comfort in the middle of organized chaos. Dave Henley, the 52-year-old site manager, paced near the window with his walkie-talkie, his beer belly straining against a company polo shirt. He'd been running construction sites for 20 years, and today felt different. VIPs were coming. Big money people, the kind who could make or break careers with a single phone call. The pressure was written across his weathered face as he checked his watch for the 100th time. Outside, the diverse crew of construction workers went about their daily routines. Marcus Rodriguez welded steel joints with practiced precision, while Danny Wilson directed concrete pours near the foundation's eastern section. Kesha Martinez operated the tower crane with the skill of someone who'd earned her operator's license the hard way, climbing through the ranks of an industry that didn't always welcome women. Each of them had stories, families, dreams tied to steady paychecks and honest work. At exactly 2:13 p.m., a figure appeared at the trailer's steps. Dr. Elijah Thompson stood 6 feet tall with the quiet confidence of someone who'd earned every credential he carried. His simple white button-down shirt and khaki pants gave him the appearance of maintenance staff rather than the Stanford-educated structural engineer he actually was. In his weathered leather portfolio, documents that would soon change everything lay waiting. His iPad Pro displayed an appointment confirmation, the screen reflecting the afternoon sun as he approached the trailer door. Brad Sinclair noticed him first through the window. The young engineer's expression shifted from concentration to confusion, then to something else entirely. He moved quickly to block the entrance, his hand on the door handle as Elijah reached for it. The collision of 2 worlds was about to begin, captured by the unblinking eyes of smartphones that were already being raised by curious workers who sensed drama in the making. "Excuse me, sir," Brad said, his voice carrying across the construction site. "This is a restricted engineering zone. Maintenance crew needs to use the service entrance around back." His tone wasn't overtly hostile, but it carried the casual dismissiveness of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. The words hung in the humid air as work sounds gradually began to fade around them. Elijah's response was measured, professional. "I'm here for the structural review meeting at 3 p.m. My name is Dr. Elijah Thompson." He held up his iPad, showing the appointment confirmation email with the Nexus Real Estate logo clearly visible at the top. The timestamp read 2:45 p.m. Client meeting. Foundation review. Brad's laugh cut through the afternoon air like a blade. "Look, I don't know who told you what, but engineers don't dress like—" He gestured vaguely at Elijah's simple clothing, letting the sentence hang unfinished. The implication was clear to everyone within earshot. Tyler and Sarah had emerged from the trailer now, flanking their lead engineer like backup dancers in a performance none of them realized they were giving. The first phones came out. Marcus Rodriguez paused his welding, lifting his face mask as he watched the scene unfold. Danny Wilson set down his clipboard, his foreman instincts telling him this was about to go sideways. But it was Kesha Martinez who acted first, pulling out her phone and opening her Facebook Live app. Within seconds, she was broadcasting to her followers, her voice low but clear. "Y'all need to see this. They're not letting this brother into the engineering meeting." The viewer count started at 0 and began climbing. 5, 12, 23. Comments started appearing almost immediately. "What's happening? Who is that man? This looks wrong." The digital audience was gathering, invisible witnesses to a drama that was just beginning to unfold. Elijah remained calm, his voice steady as he opened his portfolio. "I have my credentials right here. I'm Dr. Thompson from Thompson Structural Consulting. We had correspondence about potential issues with Foundation Section C7. He produced a business card, his fingers steady despite the growing crowd of onlookers. The card was simple, professional, with the Stanford University consulting firm logo embossed in conservative font. Tyler stepped forward, his voice carrying the arrogance of youth mixed with Georgia Tech pride. "C7, we've triple-checked that section. Maybe you're thinking of a different project?" His tone suggested that Elijah couldn't possibly understand the complexity of their work, that he was confused or perhaps in the wrong place entirely. Sarah Chen adjusted her safety glasses, her expression skeptical. "Are you sure you have the right site? This is highly technical work. We can't have unauthorized personnel in our workspace." Her words were careful, lawyer-approved, but the meaning underneath was crystal clear to everyone listening. The crowd was growing. What had started as casual curiosity was becoming something more focused, more charged. Workers set down tools and moved closer, forming a loose semicircle around the trailer entrance. The construction site's natural hierarchy was being challenged, and everyone could feel it. Kesha's live-stream viewer count hit 57, then 84. The digital audience was growing alongside the physical one. Dave Henley's walkie-talkie crackled to life, breaking the tension momentarily. "Site manager to main office. How long until the VIP arrival?" The response came back quickly. 47 minutes, Dave. Everything better be perfect." The countdown had begun, adding urgency to an already volatile situation. Brad snatched the iPad from Elijah's hands, his movements sharp and dismissive. "Anyone can make an appointment. These could be fake." He scrolled through the device with the casual violation of someone who believed he had the right to take what he wanted. The tablet's premium case and the institutional email addresses visible on the screen suggested otherwise, but Brad seemed determined not to see what didn't fit his assumptions. "Security should handle this," Sarah said, her voice rising slightly. "We can't have random people wandering around a construction site. This is a liability issue." Her words carried the weight of corporate policy and legal protection, the kind of language that had ended many conversations before they could begin. But Elijah wasn't backing down. The timer on his tablet continued its relentless countdown. 43 minutes until client arrival. 43 minutes until everything would change. But none of the young engineers could see the storm that was approaching, carried in a leather portfolio and backed by decades of education and experience they couldn't imagine. The Atlanta heat pressed down on all of them as the confrontation entered its second phase, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of approaching engines began to echo off the concrete structures around them. The reckoning was coming, but first the humiliation had to be complete. Dave Henley emerged from the main office trailer, his face flushed from the heat and stress of coordinating VIP arrivals. His 20 years of construction experience had taught him to spot trouble before it exploded, but today his radar was focused on impressing corporate executives rather than reading the human dynamics playing out at his engineering trailer. The sound of raised voices had drawn his attention, and now he approached with the swagger of someone accustomed to solving problems with authority rather than understanding. "What's all the commotion here?" Dave's voice carried across the construction site, causing several workers to look up from their tasks. "We've got VIPs coming in less than an hour. I need this place running like clockwork." His beer belly preceded him as he walked, and sweat stains marked his company polo despite the relatively early afternoon hour. The walkie-talkie clipped to his belt continued to crackle with updates from various crew chiefs. Brad straightened, relieved to have backup. "This maintenance guy says he's here for our engineering meeting. Claims to be some kind of doctor." The way he emphasized claims made it clear what he thought of Elijah's credentials. His Georgia Tech class ring caught the sunlight as he gestured dismissively toward the man he'd already written off. Dave looked Elijah up and down with the practiced eye of someone who sorted people into categories every day. Contractors, subcontractors, vendors, executives. Each group had its place in his world, and Elijah didn't fit the executive category. "Son, I think there's been some kind of mistake here. Engineering consultants usually call ahead, and they typically—" He paused, searching for diplomatic language. "Well, they usually dress more formally for meetings like this." The implication hung heavy in the summer air. Around them, the construction site had taken on an almost theatrical quality, with workers gradually forming an audience for the unfolding drama. Kesha's live stream had reached 112 viewers, and the comments were coming faster now. "This is discrimination! Let the man speak. Where are the supervisors?" Elijah reached into his portfolio with movements that remained calm despite the escalating situation. He produced a business card holder, the leather worn smooth from years of professional use. From it, he extracted his business card and his professional engineering license, both bearing his name and credentials in clear, official typeface. "I'm Dr. Elijah Thompson, licensed structural engineer. I have an appointment to discuss critical concerns about Foundation Section C7. Tyler Mitchell stepped closer, his youth making him bold in ways that experience might have tempered. "Doctor of what exactly? Community college?" His laugh was meant to be shared with his colleagues, but it rang hollow in the charged atmosphere. The comment drew uncomfortable shifting from some of the watching workers, but it also drew more phones. The circle of documentation was tightening around the confrontation. Sarah Chen pulled out her own phone, but not to record. She was texting, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. "I'm checking the appointment system. We don't have any Dr. Thompson scheduled." Her voice carried the confidence of someone who believed technology would vindicate her position. She didn't look up to see Elijah's tablet displaying the very appointment she claimed didn't exist. "C7 is perfectly sound," Brad declared with the certainty of someone who'd never been wrong about anything important. "I went to Georgia Tech. I know structural engineering. We've run those calculations 3 times. He straightened his tie, a gesture that seemed designed to emphasize his professional appearance in contrast to Elijah's casual dress. But Elijah pressed on, his voice remaining level even as the crowd around them grew larger and more restless. "The soil report indicates clay composition issues at 15 feet below grade. The current foundation design doesn't account for seasonal water table fluctuations. This could result in differential settling that compromises the entire structure." The technical language seemed to give the young engineers pause for a moment, but Dave Henley had heard enough. His walkie-talkie squawked again, with another update about VIP arrival timing, and his patience was wearing thin. "Look, I'm sure you mean well, but we can't have unauthorized personnel interfering with an $847 million project. This is way above your pay grade." The number hit like a thunderclap. $847 million. More money than most of the watching construction workers would see in several lifetimes. The scale of the project suddenly made the confrontation feel even more David and Goliath, with Elijah cast as the presumptuous outsider challenging giants. Marcus Rodriguez finally spoke up from his position near the steel framework. "Hey, Dave. Maybe we should listen to what the man has to say. He seems to know what he's talking about." His words carried the weight of 15 years on construction sites, but they also carried the risk of challenging his boss in front of everyone. Danny Wilson nodded agreement from his concrete station. "This doesn't feel right, man. The guy's got credentials." But their voices were outnumbered by the dismissive attitudes of the management team, and their positions in the site hierarchy didn't give them much influence over engineering decisions. Dave's hand moved to his walkie-talkie. "Security to the engineering trailer. We have a situation that needs handling." The request went out over the radio waves, reaching the guards stationed at the main gate. Within minutes, they would arrive to remove the problem and restore order to the site. Elijah heard the call, but showed no signs of backing down. Instead, he opened his notebook and began writing, his pen moving steadily across the lined pages. Brad Sinclair, lead engineer; Tyler Mitchell, structural engineer; Sarah Chen, project engineer; Dave Henley, site manager, all present during discriminatory treatment of licensed professional engineer based on appearance and racial assumptions. "Are you threatening us?" Brad's voice rose an octave, his carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. "This is completely ridiculous. You can't just show up here and start making accusations." But even as he spoke, he seemed to realize that Elijah wasn't behaving like someone who was bluffing or confused. There was a methodical quality to his documentation that suggested experience with exactly this type of situation. The countdown timer on Elijah's tablet continued its relentless march. 28 minutes until client arrival. 28 minutes until the truth would emerge and the power dynamics would shift in ways none of the young engineers could imagine. But for now, they remained confident in their positions, protected by their assumptions and their authority. Around them, the construction site hummed with an undercurrent of tension that had nothing to do with deadlines or technical challenges. This was about respect, recognition, and the dangerous assumptions people make when they think they know someone's place in the world. The stage was set for a reckoning that would be witnessed not just by the growing crowd of construction workers, but by thousands of viewers watching through the lens of social media. The sound of approaching security guards' footsteps added urgency to the scene, but in the distance, barely audible over the construction noise, came the whisper of approaching engines that would soon change everything. Elijah Thompson had faced this type of discrimination before, but never quite so publicly, and never with stakes this high. As he continued his careful documentation, his expression remained professionally neutral, giving no hint of the storm that was about to break over the construction site. The young engineers around him had no idea they were about to become unwilling participants in a masterclass on the consequences of prejudice and the power of actual expertise. The security guards' approach could be heard clearly now, their radios crackling with position updates. But Elijah made no move to leave. Instead, he closed his notebook with a decisive snap and looked directly at Dave Henley. "I'll wait here until 3 o'clock. That's when my meeting is scheduled." His words carried the quiet authority of someone who knew exactly where he belonged and wasn't going to be moved by bluster or intimidation. Elijah Thompson refused to be hurried or intimidated. Instead of responding with anger or defensiveness, he demonstrated something far more powerful: the measured response of a professional who knew his worth and understood his rights. He reopened his portfolio and withdrew a small leather notebook, worn smooth from years of use. The pages within contained the careful documentation of a man who'd learned that in a world quick to dismiss him, evidence was everything. California Labor Code Section 11022, 1 prohibits workplace discrimination based on race, appearance, or perceived social status. He said quietly, his pen moving steadily across the lined paper. Each word was chosen carefully, each observation recorded with the precision of someone who understood that documentation could become vindication. The legal citation came naturally, the product of too many encounters with people who thought they could treat him however they pleased. Brad Sinclair's face flushed red, his carefully maintained professional composure beginning to crack like concrete under pressure. "Are you seriously threatening to sue us? Over what? We're just doing our jobs, maintaining site security." But his voice carried a tremor that hadn't been there before, the first sign that perhaps this situation wasn't as simple as he'd assumed. Around them, the atmosphere was shifting like weather before a storm. Kesha Martinez's livestream had exploded to over 1,000 viewers, and the comment section was scrolling too fast to read. Discrimination in real time. This brother is about to school them. Get a lawyer. The digital audience was becoming increasingly invested, sharing the stream across platforms and drawing more witnesses to the unfolding confrontation. You all need to pay attention to this, Kesha narrated to her audience, her voice carrying both anger and anticipation. They won't even let this educated brother speak his piece, but something tells me they about to find out who they messing with. Her words were prophetic in ways she couldn't yet understand, but her instincts told her this story was far from over. The construction workers were beginning to choose sides, their long-suppressed feelings about workplace fairness finding voice in the safety of numbers. Marcus Rodriguez set down his welding equipment entirely, pulling off his protective gear as he moved closer to the confrontation. Dave, this is wrong, man. I've been working construction for 15 years, and I've seen plenty of engineers. They don't all wear three-piece suits. Danny Wilson joined him, his clipboard forgotten as he watched the drama unfold. Hell, I've seen engineers show up in flip-flops and Hawaiian shirts. What matters is what they know, not what they wear. His comment drew nods from several other workers, the beginning of a groundswell that the management team was starting to notice with growing unease. But Tyler and Sarah remained locked in their positions, perhaps sensing that backing down now would mean admitting they'd been wrong from the start. Tyler pulled out his own phone, not to record, but to call what he assumed was a bluff. If you're really some big-shot engineer, then you should have contacts at our corporate office. Let me call them and verify your appointment. Elijah nodded calmly. Please do. Ask for Margaret Carter, Vice President of Development. She's the one who personally requested my consultation on this project. The name dropped like a stone into still water, creating ripples of recognition among those who knew the corporate hierarchy. Margaret Carter wasn't just any executive. She was known throughout the Atlanta construction community as someone who didn't suffer fools and who valued expertise above all else. Sarah Chen's confident texting slowed as she processed this information. Margaret Carter was several pay grades above anyone on their team, someone who could end careers with a single phone call. If this man really had been requested by Margaret Carter personally, then everything they thought they knew about this situation was wrong. Dave Henley's walkie-talkie crackled again with increasing urgency. Site manager, we need status update on VIP arrival preparations. ETA now 22 minutes. The countdown was becoming more insistent, adding pressure to an already volatile situation. Dave wiped sweat from his forehead, suddenly less certain about how to handle what had seemed like a simple security issue. Elijah continued his methodical documentation, each observation entered with careful precision. Exclusion from scheduled meeting based on racial profiling, confiscation of personal device without authorization, refusal to acknowledge professional credentials despite clear evidence. The list grew longer as he wrote, creating a paper trail that would soon become very important to people with far more authority than anyone currently on the construction site. 2 security guards finally arrived, Officers Johnson and Davis, both looking uncomfortable as they surveyed the scene. The crowd of construction workers, the live streaming, the obvious tension. This wasn't the simple trespassing call they'd expected. "Sir, you're going to need to come with us," Officer Johnson said to Elijah, but his tone lacked conviction. Something about the man's calm demeanor and professional bearing didn't match the troublemaker they'd been called to remove. "I understand your position," Elijah replied, closing his notebook with deliberate care. "But I have documentation proving my right to be here, and I've done nothing but attempt to attend a scheduled meeting. I'll comply with your request, but I want it noted that this meeting was critical for building safety." He stood slowly, gathering his materials with the unhurried movements of someone who wasn't running from anything. Kesha's livestream audience had swelled to nearly 3,000 viewers, with shares spreading the video across Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. Comments were flooding in from engineers, construction workers, and social justice advocates around the country. "This is exactly what's wrong with America. Somebody gonna get fired. Justice is coming." The crowd of construction workers had grown larger and more vocal, with several pulling out their own phones to document what was happening. The multiple angles of coverage were creating a comprehensive record that would soon become very useful to investigators and journalists alike. Marcus Rodriguez shook his head in disgust. "This is 2024, and we still doing this. Man's got more education than all of them put together, I bet." In the distance, barely audible over the construction noise and growing crowd, came the sound of approaching luxury vehicles. Multiple engines, expensive and well-maintained, growing closer with each passing moment. The VIPs were arriving ahead of schedule, and they were about to walk into a situation that would define careers and potentially change an entire company's approach to diversity and inclusion. But for now, the security guards were preparing to escort Elijah away from the very meeting he'd been invited to attend. The irony was lost on everyone except the man himself, who walked toward the gate with the dignified bearing of someone who knew that sometimes you had to lose a battle to win a war. The countdown timer on his tablet read 18 minutes until the official arrival time, but the sound of engines suggested that timeline was about to be dramatically accelerated. Justice was coming to the Nexus Tower construction site, carried in luxury vehicles and armed with the kind of authority that could reshape everything in a matter of minutes. As Elijah reached the security checkpoint, he turned back toward the engineering trailer where Brad, Tyler, Sarah, and Dave stood watching with expressions that ranged from smug satisfaction to growing uncertainty. "You might want to prepare for that meeting," he called back to them. "I believe it's going to be more important than you realize." The words carried a weight that none of them fully understood, but would remember very clearly in the minutes to come. The first luxury vehicle appeared at the construction site's main entrance like a harbinger of change, its black Mercedes S-Class sedan gleaming despite the dust that coated everything else in the Georgia heat. Behind it followed a BMW 7 Series and an Audi A8, forming a procession that commanded attention and respect from everyone who saw it. These weren't the pickup trucks and work vans that typically navigated the construction site's rutted paths. These were vehicles that meant serious money and serious power. Dave Henley's demeanor changed instantly, his walkie-talkie practically vibrating with nervous energy as he switched from security concerns to VIP protocol. "Places, everyone! VIPs are here early!" His voice carried across the construction site, causing workers to straighten their postures and site supervisors to appear from various trailer offices. The transformation was immediate and dramatic, like actors taking their positions for a performance they'd rehearsed, but never quite perfected. Brad Sinclair smoothed his hair and straightened his tie, his confidence returning as he prepared for what he assumed would be a routine presentation to corporate executives. Tyler and Sarah flanked him, their laptops closed and their professional smiles ready. They had no idea they were about to become the unwitting stars of a corporate drama that would be discussed in business schools for years to come. The luxury vehicles came to a stop in a cloud of settling dust, their engines ticking quietly in the humid air. Kesha Martinez's live-stream audience watched in real time as car doors opened and figures emerged, though the distance and dust made it difficult to identify individuals clearly. "Something big about to happen," she narrated to her viewers. "These cars don't come to construction sites unless somebody important got something important to say." Margaret Carter stepped out of the lead Mercedes with the commanding presence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. At 58, she carried herself with the confidence that came from 3 decades of making decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Her tailored charcoal suit was immaculate despite the construction site environment, and her silver hair was pulled back in a style that suggested both professionalism and authority. She paused for a moment, surveying the construction site with the practiced eye of someone who'd overseen countless projects. The Nexus Tower's skeletal frame rose behind her, a testament to months of planning and millions in investment. But her attention quickly focused on the crowd gathered near the engineering trailer, and the expression on her face suggested she already knew more about the situation than anyone realized. "Where is Dr. Elijah Thompson?" Margaret's voice carried clearly across the construction site, cutting through the background noise of machinery and nervous conversation. "He should be here by now." The words landed like a bomb in the midst of the gathered crowd, creating a silence so complete that even the construction equipment seemed to pause in respectful attention. Brad Sinclair felt the blood drain from his face as the implications of her words hit him like a physical blow. Dr. Thompson, the man they'd dismissed, humiliated, and were in the process of having escorted off the site. The man whose credentials they'd questioned and whose appointment they'd denied. Every assumption they'd made, every dismissive comment they'd offered, suddenly took on a completely different meaning. The security guards, who had been preparing to escort Elijah to the main gate, stopped mid-stride as if they'd run into an invisible wall. Officer Johnson looked at his partner with an expression that clearly communicated they'd just stepped into something far bigger than a simple trespassing case. The walkie-talkie chatter that had been routine suddenly felt ominous. "I'm Dr. Thompson." Elijah stepped forward from the cluster of security personnel and construction workers, his portfolio still in hand and his professional demeanor unchanged despite the treatment he'd just received. There was no triumph in his voice, no hint of vindication, just the calm acknowledgement of a professional responding to a colleague. Margaret Carter extended her hand without hesitation, her smile genuine and warm. "Doctor, thank you for coming on such short notice. I hope you haven't been waiting long." The handshake lasted longer than professional courtesy required, and her eyes swept the crowd with an expression that suggested she was rapidly piecing together what had transpired in her absence. The livestream audience exploded with comments as viewers witnessed the power reversal in real time. "Told you so!" "Justice!" "Somebody about to get fired!" The viewer count had climbed past 5,000, with shares spreading the video across social media platforms at viral speed. This wasn't just a construction site confrontation anymore. It was becoming a national conversation about prejudice, assumptions, and consequences. Dave Henley approached with uncertainty written across his weathered features, his earlier confidence replaced by the growing realization that he might have made a career-ending mistake. "Miss Carter, there seems to have been some miscommunication about Dr. Thompson's appointment." His voice carried the careful tone of someone trying to minimize their liability, while the ground shifted beneath their feet. Miscommunication. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly, an expression that anyone who'd worked with her recognized as a warning sign. She turned to address the crowd that had gathered, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. "For those who don't know, Dr. Thompson graduated summa cum laude from Stanford University with his PhD in structural engineering. He's one of the country's foremost experts in seismic-resistant high-rise construction." The silence that followed her words was deafening. Tyler Mitchell stared at the ground, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Sarah Chen had gone pale, her phone hanging forgotten in her hand. But it was Brad Sinclair who seemed to age years in the span of seconds, his Georgia Tech class ring suddenly feeling like a toy compared to the credentials Margaret had just outlined. Elijah opened his portfolio with movements that seemed casual, but were actually precisely calculated for maximum impact. One by one, he produced documents that transformed him from a dismissed maintenance worker into one of the most qualified structural engineers in the Southeast. His PhD diploma from Stanford University School of Engineering, his professional engineer license from the California State Board, his certification in advanced seismic design for high-rise structures. Each document was laminated, official, and undeniable. But the piece of paper that caused the biggest reaction was a research publication titled Clay Foundation Stability in Urban Construction Environments. The author's name was clearly visible, Dr. Elijah Thompson, Ph.D. The publication date was recent, and the technical language visible in the abstract made it clear this wasn't amateur work. This was cutting-edge research that addressed exactly the type of challenges faced by projects like the Nexus Tower. Dr. Thompson identified critical flaws in our foundation design. Margaret continued, her voice cutting through the construction site noise like a blade through silk. Flaws that could have cost us not just money, but potentially lives. She paused, letting the weight of that statement settle over the crowd. His analysis suggests we're looking at significant structural risks that our original engineering team missed. The words hit Brad like physical blows, each one undermining months of work and years of professional confidence. But our calculations, he managed weakly. We triple-checked everything. The geotechnical analysis showed data from soil samples taken in October. Elijah interrupted gently, his voice carrying the patient tone of a teacher explaining a concept to struggling students. Clay composition changes with seasonal water table fluctuations. The samples you relied on don't reflect current conditions. He opened his tablet, displaying soil density readings and water table measurements that painted a very different picture from the one the original engineering team had used. Marcus Rodriguez, who had been watching from his position near the steel framework, shook his head with a mixture of vindication and disgust. Man tried to tell y'all about Section C7. Y'all wouldn't listen. His words carried the authority of 15 years on construction sites and the satisfaction of someone whose instincts had been proven right. The crowd dynamics had shifted completely now, with construction workers who had been dismissed or ignored suddenly finding their voices. Danny Wilson stepped forward, his clipboard in hand. I was wondering about that Eastern Foundation section. Seemed like we were hitting different soil compositions than the reports indicated. His observation, which had been dismissed earlier by site management, now carried the weight of expert validation. Kesha Martinez, still live streaming to an audience that had grown to nearly 8,000 viewers, provided real-time narration of the unfolding drama. Y'all seeing this? This brother with the PhD just schooled all these engineers who thought they knew better. This is what happens when you judge people by how they look instead of what they know. Margaret Carter's phone buzzed with notifications as more corporate executives arrived on site. The black vehicles had disgorged a small army of suits, legal representatives, human resources personnel, and senior management who had been called in to handle what was rapidly becoming a company-wide crisis. The timer on Elijah's tablet had reached 0, but the meeting it had been counting down to was no longer necessary. The questions that had brought him to the construction site were being answered in real time, broadcast live to thousands of viewers, and documented by dozens of smartphones. The reckoning that Brad, Tyler, Sarah, and Dave had never seen coming was now unavoidable, witnessed by an audience that would ensure accountability. The hierarchy that had seemed so solid an hour earlier was crumbling like a foundation built on unstable ground, and the man they had tried to dismiss was now the center of attention, his expertise finally recognized and his authority beyond question. But the real consequences were just beginning to unfold, and they would reach far beyond the boundaries of the Nexus Tower construction site. Margaret Carter's phone rang with the distinctive tone reserved for senior corporate leadership, and she answered it with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to managing crises in real time. "Get me legal, COO, and HR on the line immediately," she instructed her assistant. Within moments, the speakerphone in the main trailer was connecting her to the highest levels of Nexus Real Estate's corporate hierarchy. "This is Jennifer Walsh, Chief Operating Officer," came the first voice through the static-filled connection. Her reputation preceded her, a former federal prosecutor who had transitioned into corporate leadership with a zero-tolerance policy for liability exposure. I'm seeing social media reports about an incident at the Atlanta site. What's our situation? Robert Kim, Legal Department, announced the second voice, followed quickly by Lisa Rodriguez, Human Resources. The triumvirate of corporate power was now focused on a construction site in Atlanta, their collective attention representing millions of dollars in potential consequences and reputation management. Margaret looked directly at Elijah, her expression mixing professional respect with what appeared to be genuine regret for what he'd endured. Dr. Thompson, would you please brief our executive team on both the technical issues and the treatment you received today? Her words carried the weight of official corporate validation, transforming Elijah from dismissed outsider to expert consultant in front of the entire construction site. Elijah opened his tablet to a detailed structural analysis that would have impressed engineering professors at any university in the country. His voice remained calm and professional as he began to systematically dismantle months of work by the on-site engineering team. The soil samples used for foundation calculations were taken during October's dry season. Current soil density readings show a 40% variance in clay composition due to seasonal water table changes. Brad Sinclair felt his professional world collapsing around him like a controlled demolition, each technical detail from Elijah destroying another piece of his confidence. But the original geotechnical report? He started to protest, his voice barely audible over the speakerphone connection, was conducted using industry-standard protocols for non-seismic zones. Elijah continued, his tone remaining educational rather than accusatory. However, Atlanta sits on the intersection of several minor fault lines that require enhanced foundation specifications. The current 18-foot foundation depth provides insufficient stability for a 67-story structure under seismic stress conditions. The silence from the speakerphone was profound, broken only by the sound of furious typing as executives on the other end processed the implications of what they were hearing. Tyler Mitchell had gone completely pale, realizing that their oversight wasn't just embarrassing, it was potentially catastrophic. "What's the risk assessment, Dr. Thompson?" Jennifer Walsh's voice carried the weight of someone calculating liability exposure in real time. Her background as a prosecutor had taught her to cut directly to the most important questions, and right now nothing was more important than understanding how badly they'd miscalculated. Elijah's response was precise and devastating. Based on current foundation specifications and soil conditions, there's an 85% probability of differential settling within 24 months of completion. This could result in structural failure of the entire tower. He paused to let the implications sink in. We're looking at a potential loss of the entire $847 million investment, plus liability for resident safety. The construction site had gone completely silent, except for the sound of smartphones recording every word. Kesha Martinez's live stream had reached 12,000 viewers, with local news stations beginning to pick up the story. This wasn't just a construction site confrontation anymore, it was becoming a case study in corporate discrimination and engineering failure that would be discussed in business schools for years. Sarah Chen finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. What would it take to fix the foundation issues? Her question carried the desperate hope of someone looking for any way to salvage a situation that had spiraled completely out of control. Emergency micropile reinforcement system, Elijah replied, his tablet displaying detailed engineering diagrams. 32 feet deep, reinforced with high tensile steel. Estimated cost, $3.2 million. But that's assuming we act immediately, before any additional construction weight is added to the existing foundation. Legal counsel Robert Kim's voice cut through the speakerphone with the sharp precision of someone identifying multiple liability exposures. Before we discuss technical solutions, I need to address what I'm seeing on social media. We have documented evidence of discrimination based on race and appearance, broadcast live to thousands of viewers. This represents significant legal and reputational risk. HR Director Lisa Rodriguez added her own concerns. "Dr. Thompson, I need to formally apologize for the treatment you received. We're looking at potential Title VII violations, hostile work environment claims, and public relations disasters. What would it take to make this right?" The power dynamic had shifted so completely that it was almost surreal. The same people who had been dismissing Elijah's credentials an hour earlier were now hanging on his every word, their careers and their company's reputation balanced on his professional opinion and personal forgiveness. Dave Henley, the site manager who had called security to remove Elijah, now stood at the edge of the crowd, looking like a man who had just watched his career evaporate in real time. His 20 years of construction experience meant nothing compared to the viral video evidence of his discrimination and poor judgment. But it was Brad Sinclair who seemed to be taking the hardest hit. His Georgia Tech class ring, which had been a source of pride earlier in the day, now felt like a symbol of his arrogance and inadequacy. The young engineer who had blocked Elijah from entering the trailer now faced the reality that he had nearly caused one of the most expensive structural failures in Atlanta's history. "Dr. Thompson." COO Jennifer Walsh's voice carried a tone of official corporate authority mixed with personal humility. "We accept your technical recommendations immediately. You have full authority to implement emergency foundation corrections. We'll also be conducting a complete review of our hiring and workplace conduct policies." The live stream audience erupted with comments celebrating the justice of the moment, but Elijah's response demonstrated the kind of grace under pressure that had carried him through years of similar challenges. "I appreciate that, Ms. Walsh. I can have emergency contractors here by Thursday morning, pending city permit approvals. The micropile system will require 24-hour work schedules to meet your December completion deadline." No gloating, no revenge, just professional competence focused on solving problems and saving lives. It was a masterclass in dignity that stood in sharp contrast to the behavior he had endured just an hour earlier. The reckoning was complete, but the consequences were just beginning. Careers would end, policies would change, and the Nexus Tower would eventually stand as a monument to what happened when prejudice met expertise. But first, there was an $847 million building to save, and only one person on the construction site who knew how to do it. The transformation of the construction site was swift and decisive, like the resolution of a complex equation finally falling into place. Within 72 hours of Margaret Carter's arrival, the Nexus Tower project had been completely restructured around Dr. Elijah Thompson's expertise and recommendations. Emergency micropile equipment arrived from Birmingham and Charlotte on flatbed trucks that required police escorts due to their massive size, and the construction site took on the organized chaos of a round-the-clock operation designed to save an $847 million investment. Dr. Thompson worked 16-hour days, his white button-down shirts replaced by hard hats and safety vests, as he personally oversaw every aspect of the foundation reinforcement. The same expertise that had been dismissed was now treated as gospel, with workers and supervisors hanging on his every technical instruction. The micropile system he designed wasn't just an engineering solution. It was a $3.2 million testament to the cost of prejudice and the value of actual competence. The corporate response was equally swift and comprehensive. Nexus Real Estate implemented new company-wide diversity and inclusion policies that went far beyond legal compliance to address the cultural failures that had created the Atlanta incident. Dr. Thompson was consulted during the policy development process, his insights helping to create training programs that would eventually be adopted by construction companies across the Southeast. The human consequences were inevitable and severe. Dave Henley, the site manager whose 20 years of experience hadn't prevented him from making the worst decision of his career, was terminated within a week. Brad Sinclair faced a more complex situation. His engineering skills were still valuable, but his judgment had been permanently compromised. He was removed from the Nexus Tower project and required to complete comprehensive sensitivity training before being assigned to smaller projects with intensive supervision. Tyler Mitchell and Sarah Chen received written reprimands and mandatory diversity training, their careers damaged but not ended. The incident would follow them through future performance reviews and promotion considerations, a permanent reminder of the day their assumptions had nearly caused a catastrophic failure. But perhaps the most significant impact was on the broader construction industry. Kesha Martinez's livestream had been viewed over 2.7 million times across various social media platforms, with major news networks including CNN and NPR covering the story as an example of ongoing workplace discrimination. The video became a standard component of corporate diversity training programs nationwide, reaching millions of employees who would never again be able to claim ignorance about the consequences of prejudiced assumptions. Dr. Thompson used the visibility from the incident to establish the Excellence in Engineering Scholarship Fund, providing full university scholarships for underrepresented minorities pursuing STEM careers. The first year's funding came partially from the settlement Nexus real estate provided to avoid prolonged litigation, and partially from speaking fees Dr. Thompson earned from corporations eager to demonstrate their commitment to inclusion. Marcus Rodriguez, the welder whose instincts had told him the confrontation was wrong, saw his own career transformed by the incident. His willingness to speak up for fairness earned him a promotion to crew supervisor, and his son became one of the first recipients of Dr. Thompson's scholarship fund. The construction site's informal hierarchy had been permanently altered, with respect now flowing toward competence and character rather than appearance and assumptions. 6 months after the incident, the National Conference of Black Engineers invited Dr. Thompson to deliver the keynote address at their annual convention, held appropriately at Stanford University, where his career had begun decades earlier. The auditorium was packed with 300 students and professionals, including several faces from the Atlanta construction site who had traveled across the country to hear him speak. Margaret Carter sat in the front row, her presence representing Nexus Real Estate's ongoing commitment to the changes that had emerged from that humid August afternoon. Kesha Martinez was there too, her role transformed from crane operator to citizen journalist covering social justice issues for a regional news outlet. Her live streaming skills had evolved into a platform for highlighting inequality and celebrating moments when justice prevailed. Even Dave Henley was in attendance, sitting toward the back of the auditorium with the uncomfortable posture of someone seeking redemption. His termination from Nexus had led to a period of reflection and ultimately to a new position with a smaller construction company, where he was working to implement the diversity and inclusion practices he had failed to recognize earlier. Dr. Thompson took the podium with the same quiet confidence he had displayed on the construction site, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. Behind him, a large screen displayed images of the completed Nexus Tower, its 67 stories rising above the Atlanta skyline as a testament to what proper engineering could accomplish. The micropile foundation system was invisible to casual observers, but it represented the difference between triumph and catastrophe. "Excellence has no color," Dr. Thompson began, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's sound system. "But ignorance has consequences." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of lived experience and professional authority that resonated with every person in the audience. He continued, "When we judge people by their appearance rather than their abilities, we don't just harm individuals, we compromise our entire profession, our projects, and our society. The Nexus Tower stands today not because of assumptions or hierarchies, but because expertise was finally recognized and respected." The applause was sustained and genuine, coming from people who understood both the technical achievements and the social significance of what had transpired. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from the students in the audience, young engineers and future professionals who would enter a workplace slightly more aware of both the challenges and the possibilities that lay ahead. As Dr. Thompson concluded his remarks, the auditorium's screens showed a final image. Construction workers of all backgrounds consulting with him on a new Atlanta project, The same professionalism that had been questioned 6 months earlier, now recognized as the standard for excellence it had always been. The message was clear. Sometimes the person you underestimate is exactly the person you need most. The Nexus Tower continues to stand as more than just a residential building. It serves as a monument to the importance of looking beyond appearances, the cost of prejudice, and the transformative power of giving expertise the respect it deserves. And somewhere in Atlanta, construction sites operate a little more fairly. Engineering meetings include a broader range of voices, and young professionals of all backgrounds have slightly better chances to be judged by their abilities rather than their assumptions. The story that began with humiliation and dismissal ended with recognition and reform, proving that sometimes justice arrives exactly when it's needed most, carried in a leather portfolio and backed by the kind of expertise that can't be dismissed forever.